Did you know that some Pokemon were found in the game's code with certain additional moves or abilities, but were never actually obtainable without cheats? Well, some of those Pokemon, at least in competitive, would have been broken, especially if they were released during that game's lifespan. Today we are going over those Pokemon. The Pokemon who were either planned and made known, or were close to being possible, but were unobtainable nonetheless. And we're structuring this in a format of 3 and 3. 3 Pokemon that were made available a generation later, but missed out on a time of excellence, and 3 Pokemon who were never available ever, even to this day. And we're starting with Contrary Serperior in Generation 5. Serperior is a Pokemon whose hidden Dream World ability was eagerly anticipated from day 1 of Generation 5, way back when its Japanese translated name was Gerudo, but it never got released, even in Black and White 2. It did finally receive the ability in Generation 6, in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and with that it rocketed up the tiering rung to become one of the best and incidentally most despised Pokemon in OU of both that generation and the 7th, wielding the incredible weapon that is Contrary Leaf Storm, otherwise known as Grassy-type Draco Meteor, but instead of dropping your special attack, you actually get a free Nasty Plot too. Wow. Talk about quickly getting out of your hand. Yeah, you just spam your strongest attack into everything and immediately become stronger. What's balance anymore, am I right? But without Contrary, Gen 5 Serperior was an NU Pokemon. A great one to be clear, but still an NU Pokemon nonetheless. And it's unlikely that it would have improved that station in the following gens without Contrary, or at least some other major buffs in its place. If it had received Contrary in Gen 5 though, it would have devoured OU play. It's already terrifying in Gen 6 and 7, where Leaf Storm is 130 base power and Hidden Power is 60 base power. Now consider that in Gen 5, it's unleashing its Leaf Storms at 140 base power a pop, and its Hidden Power is at 70 base power. Serperior packing even more power is incredibly frightening, and what's more, it matches up against Gen 5 standards beautifully. It utterly destroys Rain and most sand teams as well. And it's not just a matter of raw strength either. Serperior has great natural bulk and defensive typing, which both provided opportunities against sand and rain standard, and it's bulky enough to make revenge killing it difficult. Pretty much every seriously dangerous wall breaker is effortlessly revenge killed by Alakazam, whether through frailty, exploitable weakness, or both. But even Alakazam's hidden power, ice or fire, don't come close to KOing a healthy Serperior, and Serperior ruins Alakazam in return with Glare's paralysis. Even Life Orb Alakazam doesn't KO Serperior after Stealth Rock. Meanwhile, choice Scarfers like Garchomp, Terrakion, and Keldeo will be coming up short as well. Same for Mamoswine's Ice Shard. This is not to say Serperior would be immovable, but it would be a far sight tougher to revenge kill than your average wall breaker. And of course, it'd also be tough to revenge kill in general because it was just so incredibly fast, meaning it's particularly excellent for not just destroying bulky Pokemon, but offensive ones as well. It gets to jump even on the rarely seen Tornadus, whose speed is already huge for how it gets to jump on the tier-defining Latios, which in turn outspeeds the fast, devastating duo of Keldeo and Terrakion, which in turn is faster than Thundurus Therian, and Serperior beats all of them. You think Snivy eventually losing its arms as it evolved was a bad thing? Well, on the contrary, it isn't, as Contrary with its hidden ability would have been incredible. Just like the next Pokemon, another Leaf Storming Grass type. But before we get to that, here's a word from our sponsor, the best in premium audio, Raycon. Mother's Day is coming up, and I know most of you have not thought about a gift yet. Why not treat your mother with Raycon's everyday earbuds? Your mom is a very busy person, and she deserves to relax with her favorite music, podcast, or audiobook. And even if she's not relaxing, she deserves to listen to those while doing her everyday tasks. I use the everyday earbuds literally every day for many tasks. I use them while I wash dishes and cook. I use them while I edit, and of course, I use them while exercising. One of the best features of the new everyday earbuds is that they're sweat resistant, so I don't have to worry when I use them to listen to music or audiobooks while I exercise. And speaking of audiobooks, I listen to a ton of them while I do tasks. It's how I absorb knowledge while I have to do chores. I'm always hustling, be it with content or working on other ventures, so I want to absorb as much knowledge as possible. In fact, I listen to so much stuff that you'd think I'd run out of earbud battery quickly. But luckily, yet another one of my favorite features of Raycon, its battery life, comes in handy here because it has a whopping 32-hour battery life, and it's got a quick charge function. 10 minutes of charging gives me 90 minutes of battery. And of course, it's always been a pain to connect to other wireless Bluetooth devices to multiple devices, but luckily with Raycon, I can simply connect them to 2 devices at once. No more hassle of disconnecting and reconnecting devices. So if you want the best in premium audio and also support the channel to help us produce more content, go to buyraycon.com/FSG to get 20% off site-wide. The tragedy of Gen 4 Darth Roserade the Wise isn't one that non-Gen 4 players would tell you. Roserade traditionally exists in two forms. Its most iconic, recognizable set is the Focus Sash lead with Sleep Powder and Toxic Spikes, max speed, and special attack. Sometimes it can trade the sash for a scarf because it understands the importance of diversity in its fashion choices, and also gets to take advantage of fast sleep to get the jump on the fast taunts coming from Azup and Aerodactyl leads, as well as being able to unleash its wickedly strong Stab Leaf Storm that smacks opponents immediately, no contrary. This Rose set can also be used outside the lead slot with Black Sludge as the item, and it's similarly effective. However, the more defining non-lead Roserade trades in its offensive leanings to instead invest in its impressive special bulk, which it then uses to set spikes, no toxic, unless it runs the double spike set, which can also be quite a pain to deal with. However, bulky Roserade never goes without spikes, and it also never runs Sleep Powder. Even the dual spikes Roserade lead set that popped up later didn't run Sleep Powder, which lead Roserade was synonymous with, and despite being fast and holding a sash, it didn't run Leaf Storm either. It's usually appropriate for defensive Roserade to go with a more consistent option for Grass Stab in either Grass Knot or the Rotom Appliance Substitute Breaking Energy Ball. Yes, that's all fine, but why not on this lead set? And why doesn't the bulky set run Sleep Powder? Wouldn't that be a great tool for it? And most of all, Sleep Powder Toxic Spikes Roserade lead sounds great, but what about Sleep Powder and Spikes? Well, Roserade would absolutely love to wield all those options that you so intelligently just inquired about, but you see, it can't, because of egg move incompatibilities, which leave it unable to use spikes alongside either Sleep Powder or Leaf Storm, let alone both. Thus, if you want Roserade to wield the power of sleep, Toxic Spikes is your only hazard option. And to really rub the Garganicle in the wound, you don't even get to launch Leaf Storms either. Roserade would have gladly sacrificed Leaf Storm in order to be able to sleep and spike, and this alone would have made it absolutely elite in Gen 4, and to have all three would just be superb. The tier would have an amazing fast-paced spiker that also brought the goods not just because it was strong offensively, but got the near automatic shutdown button that was sleep, so as to really drive an immense amount of pressure home. With Roserade's effortlessly excellent defensive profile in conjunction with enabling threatening Pokemon to far greater extents than the comparatively limited reach of Toxic Spikes, offensive teams would have absolutely adored it. Roserade being UU is not impossible, but far more difficult to imagine with this combination at its disposal. In both Gens 4 and 5, Sleep eventually got banned as a whole in Gen 5, but Roserade would have been downright excellent there as opposed to the more niche Toxic Spiker that it was throughout Black and White and parts of Black and White 2. It could finally sleep and spike in Gen 6, but by that point, power creep had gone too far, and there was also the fact that grasses were now immune to Sleep Powder, which wasn't the case in the two preceding gens. As a bonus, Gen 6 also gave Roserade a very nice boost to its base defense that would have been immensely helpful in Gens 4 and 5, no longer threatening to instantly collapse against Pursuit's Bullet Punch's and Breloom's superpower. And speaking of Gen 4 Pokemon, our next one made quite the eruption, with non-quiet Eruption Heatran. Heatran receiving Eruption through the Pokemon Ranger Guardian Signs event, which happened sometime into Heart Gold and Soul Silver's lifespan, had the player base fearing for the Gen 4 metagame at the time. It seemed like it would become OU's fire equivalent to Kyogre, or if you prefer, a superpowered Typhlosion. It was an already superb Pokemon, now capable of using its Latios equivalent special attack to go even further than matching the mighty Meteor with Overheat. It could now launch Blast Burn level power at opponents without the usual drawbacks that such areas of strength are usually required of. No recharge turn, no special attack drop, not even 90% accuracy. Yes, Eruption's max power required full health, but A, that wasn't unreasonable early in battles, and B, it was still incredibly strong even with a bit of damage done. For instance, switching into something like a Fortress Rapid Spin would still leave Eruption out damaging Overheat, while even after a round of Stealth Rock, it would far out damage Fire Blast, and unlike Overheat, could be used repeatedly. Even after 2 rounds of Stealth Rock, it did way more than Flamethrower. You get the picture. With this much leeway for this much power, Eruptran had all the promise in the world. And yet, Eruption becoming a Heatran standard was denied of us all the way until Generation 8, because before then, it could only use the move when wielding a quiet nature. On the plus side, this boosted its special attack, meaning you could fully Eruption max, as the kids might say. On the not so potential plus side, Quiet is also a speed-lowering nature, meaning that the opponent would have a much easier time outspeeding you and thus denying your Eruption maxing. Quiet Tran with a maximum speed investment hits 227. That's not terrible, but it still outran most Tyranitar, for instance, and Tyranitar gets the job done nicely, but Tyranitar's low speed also holds it back quite a bit. It was a far cry from the potential 253 or 278 of Heatran's modest or timid variants. Most tragically, it denied the possibility of Choice Scarf. Quiet Scarf Heatran hits 340 speed. Now it's great that it outruns Miss Magius and Scyther, I guess. Like, yay, the legendary would devastate UU with that speed. In OU though, while it's nice that it at least beats the tiers base 100s, that's cheering for the bare minimum. The fact that it can't even outrun Infernape is disgraceful, to say nothing of losing out on Gengar, Latias, and Starmie. What about Trick Room teams? Yeah, those unreliable gimmicks which would rather use Serperior anyway. Now, Eruption was discovered to have a niche down the line with Choice Specs, as Spectran was a great lead already, and this way it started out at full health for full Eruption power, but its speed tier was still more than sufficient to devastate defensive teams, as its power and spammability were tremendous for blasting through common Clefable teams even more easily than the standard modest Overheater. There was actually a major tournament game where a Flygon, known to just barely survive Overheat, switched into a Specs Eruption and was deleted cleanly. Man, is that satisfying. But still, it's difficult to not lament the potential of a fully unleashed Eruption, and not just Gen 4, but any of 5, 6, and 7. It could have run Choice Scarf so beautifully, it could have run Specs even more effectively, and beyond those, it could also run good old Leftovers, whose health recovery would let Heatran shrug off minor damage like rocks and get its Eruption back to its strongest. Each round of lefties would restore a significant amount of BP, and Heatran could pair it with Protect, as so many of its best sets famously did, to make it even easier. So would Gen 7's Tapu Bulu and its grassy terrain, and there if Heatran didn't want to go with lefties, Z Eruption would, regardless of health, skyrocket to 200 battle power, easily outdoing Z Magma Storm's boosted 180. And with one fire type, we move on to another fire type, and our other category of Pokemon who were just never released, starting with Gen 5 Shadow Tag Chandelure. It is difficult to fully describe the extent of the panic in the mean streets of Smogon.com/forums and various competitive affiliates in September of 2010 upon receiving the news that this new Fire Ghost Pokemon with a base 145 special attack called Shandera would eventually receive the ability Shadow Tag. Let's put it like this. It didn't even exist yet, and there was already rioting over it. The arguments over whether it needed to be banned on site or whether we should tolerate it for some time were so heated, so viscerally nasty, they made political debates seem polite, well thought out, and in good faith. We now know Shandera as Chandelure, and we have been lucky enough to never know it with Shadow Tag, at least in standard play. During current Gen Black and White, there was the Dream World OU metagame, named for the in-game process through which Pokemon received their hidden abilities, otherwise known as the same Nexus Portal for another dimension, which gave us Poison Heal on Gliscor and Drizzle on Politoed. It was somewhat of a precursor to the National Dex format of Gen 8 and 9, where Megas and Z-moves, among other things, are still available. But in Gen 5's Dream World, the premise was instead allowing every unreleased Pokemon and their hidden abilities, allowing players an alternate metagame to use things like Genesect, Keldeo, and Technician Breloom before their release. Dream World OU was quite an insane metagame with things like Sandrush Extra Drill and Speed Boost Blaziken roaming free, but it was Shadow Tag Chandelure that was the most frightening threat of all, and a source of great controversy even in the metagame that wasn't really meant to be tiered. Now, Dream World OU severely waned in popularity upon the arrival of Black and White 2, since almost everything major was released then, barring a few things that never saw the light of day, of course. Players were especially disappointed to not receive the Lightning Rod Zapdos and Water Absorbed Suicune that they had been anticipating for so long. However, easily the biggest news was the non-event of Chandelure never receiving Shadow Tag, even if you didn't play Dream World OU or Ubers for that matter, where Shadow Tag Chandelure was also one of the most important, prominent, dominant Pokemon. You knew how utterly insane such a Pokemon would be, provided you had any sort of competitive experience. To actually experience its deletist effect would be like staring at the sun just so that you would actually go blind, because it just wasn't enough to know that you would. For those not familiar why Shadow Tag is such an outrageous ability, the gist is that abilities that trap opponents are already controversial, if not overwhelming, especially the wide reach of Arena Trap that nabs any grounded Pokemon. Shadow Tag trapping quite literally every Pokemon is just obscene. Here's the real kicker. These abilities are game-breaking even on Pokemon that are not very good in and of themselves. Forget Dugtrio, Diglett was causing genuine problems. It's why Arena Trap the ability is banned in singles. just in case someone gets smart and tries to cause problems with Mini Dugtrio, because history shows that will happen and they will be successful. Shadow Tag takes this to an extreme with Wobbuffet, which literally can't damage the opponent unless the opponent attacks it, going from useless in the ability lacking Gen 2 to a permanent Uber in Gen 3 and beyond. There's even another Gen 5 Pokemon which did receive Shadow Tag from the Dream World, Gothitelle. Gothitelle is much worse than Chandelure. It's slower, weaker, has worse typing, and it wielded Shadow Tag to such nasty effect in both Gens 5 and 6 that the ability got canned. Neither Wobbuffet nor Gothitelle are worth much anything without this ability. Now take Chandelure, which is quite a good Pokemon in its own right. A tiny handful of good players occasionally use it to decent effect in OU, but it really becomes notorious for how it completely demolished UU, getting banned at the time of the generation. However, throughout Black and White, the specter of Shadow Tag hung over it, everyone constantly waiting in fear for it to get the ability that would shatter the game, and the difficulty in getting it banned that would actually ensue, unless you played Ubers, in which case you just dreaded the fact that you'd have to deal with it. The crux of a trapping ability is that, as generally unimpressive as a Pokemon might be, that's only in the context of you being able to switch out against it. For instance, Magneton is useless in Gen 2 OU because it doesn't exert pressure on much of the tier in the way other electrics do. It threatens Skarmory, yes, but it may as well be Pikachu in this context. In Gen 3, however, Magnezone is still no Zapdos, but it forcibly removes Skarmory with Magnapole, and thus becomes an important OU Pokemon. Now amplify that concept by about 1 million, and you've got Shadow Tag Chandelure, which can take out, well, basically anything, even Pokemon you'd think are normally trap resistant. For example, Gliscor is famously one of the most resilient Pokemon in the game, and part of why it's so good at going the distance is how it doesn't fear any form of trapping, not even pursuit. With its outrageous special attack and Choice Scarf HP Ice, Chandelure would eliminate Gliscor easily. It'd be similarly effective at dispatching other major threats like Dragonite and most variants of Landorus and Garchomp. Anything weak to fire or ghost, forget it. Everyone was panicking over how Shed Shell would become an obligatory item, one you'd have to throw on practically everything, and indeed, in Dream World OU and Ubers alike, Shed Shell was mandatory for Ferrothorn, which made Ferrothorn easier to deal with in general, and Ferrothorn would never bother with Shed Shell for Magnezone because Magnezone wasn't ubiquitous. Chandelure excelled at ruining bulky Pokemon, even with a Scarf set, thanks to Trick. Enjoy your useless Chansey or Blissey. Of course, it could take things one step further by turning certain bulky Pokemon like the Blobs, Jirachi, and Celebi into setup bait for a substitute calm mindset that threatened to run away with the entire game. Alternatively, it could expand its reach even further with choice specs, letting it delete Hippowdon. But wait, Tyranitar's everywhere, you say. Chandelure will get trapped itself. Well, other than the fact that making Tyranitar, the often exploited glue of Gen 5, even more obligatory is a nightmarish proposition of otherworldly proportions, there's also the fact that just getting one trap off is already enough to break the game. If all you need is one Pokemon on the other team removed so you can win, which is indeed the case for many major threats, Chandelure will handle it for you. The whole issue with trapping is that switching, the ability to preserve your Pokemon in the face of something that threatens it, is undone, and you are forced to simply lose the Pokemon. It's not something that can be brushed off. If Shadow Tag Chandelure ever got released, it's basically unleashing the third act of Akira on the competitive Pokemon world. Chaos, destruction, and ruin, while people squawk and squabble over each other regarding whether it's actually a problem in the first place. Nevertheless, Game Freak knew there was some power that even they could not abide, and mercifully left Shadow Tag Chandelure in the Dream World, never to awaken and become material reality. What if I told you there's something even more egregious than that? As Chandelure's KO power was incredible, but it was nothing compared with Gen 7 Fissure plus No Guard Machamp. One-hit KO moves are unilaterally banned in singles, though they were tested in Gen 5 Ubers, with Sheer Code Kyogre instantly reminding everyone why that was a ridiculous idea. But in VGC, they're totally fine. Yeah, they're totally fine, Wolf Glick said to himself as visions of Ting Lu haunted his nightmares. In the first 2 generations, Machamp had access to Fissure, one of the 4-horse Pokemon of the one-hit Chaocalypse, but it lost the move come Generation 3, where double battles came into existence and became the format adopted for Game Freak's official tournaments. And since Gen 3 couldn't link with the first 2 gens of games, there was no way for it to obtain the move retroactively. Then in the 4th generation, Machamp gained the No Guard ability, where it could never dodge an opponent's attack, but in exchange, it got to hit every attack itself, which was ultimately a massive win for it considering it had the 50% accuracy auto-confused dynamic punch in its arsenal. A weapon so overwhelming, after much controversy, eventually got itself banned from Gen 4 OU. In VGC though, it wasn't anything to write home about. Now around this time, everyone made jokes about the possibility of a never miss Sheer Cold Machamp, which seems strange because why would it be sheer cold instead of the design-appropriate Fissure that it already had, unless everyone collectively agreed that Machamp was just so jacked that it dropped the temperature to dangerous sub-zero levels and we just didn't get the memo. But indeed, the can't miss ability opens up all sorts of possibilities for moves otherwise ruined by their accuracy, and one-hit KO moves are the biggest of all. Oh, Machamp's slow. Throw a Choice Scarf on that bad boy and watch things drop. So imagine the excitement when realizing in Gen 6, the release of Red and Blue on the Virtual Console meant that Pokemon could be transferred to the modern day games. In practical terms, this was huge because they'd regain certain moves that were previously lost to them, which could be huge. For example, Gold and Silver's Virtual Console release meant Gen 7 Mega Scizor gained Curse, which allowed it to effectively duel the likes of Coil Zygarde and Swords Dance Gliscor. What did this mean for our four-armed friend? That's right, the 7th generation saw Machamp regain Fissure. Ah yeah, Pokemon's Arnold Schwarzenegger was set to burst onto the VGC scene, targeting nearly everything for termination. Oh, what's that? Machamp can't have Fissure on the same set as Nogard? Yep, that's no accident. Game Freak knew what they were doing. For all their questionable balancing decisions, it's to their credit that they didn't let this slip by them, because otherwise Machamp would have made VGC deeply unpleasant, at least for the format at the time. Threatening a one-hit KO on a wide variety of Pokemon is one thing, being able to one-hit KO literally everything not immune to ground with no drawback, and sure, there's other things that you can do like Fake Out, Protect, and Follow Me to try to offset the absurdity of Click Move, Watch Pokemon Faint. Thinking about whether the attack is effective or not is for squares. Might makes right after all. Basically, Fissure no guard Machamp would be a dictator. Even loading up Levitators, Flying types, and Air Balloon Pokemon won't do much when someone inevitably pairs Machamp with Gravity, and then there's literally nothing to withstand it. There would also be Faint support to break Protects, and at that point you'll be relying on Focus Sash, Sturdy, and Mimikyu with its disguise, and even then it's so skewed in favor of Machamp. Choice Scarf is obvious, but far from the only way Machamp would be able to function. It could go with Sash, Assault Vest, Pinch Healing Berries, Resist Berries, whatever. It's especially wild considering how flawed Machamp is too. Low bulk, low speed, not many resistances, but it's hardly knocked over by a light breeze either. Not nearly to the extent you need to offset the fact that it has a move that automatically KOs almost everything. Plus, with Fissure, you don't actually need any attack investment to do more damage than literally everything else, making it even more unhinged. So you can invest in its bulk, and turns out when you do that, Champ becomes quite a fair hit taker. Some elements of Pokemon are just not meant to go together, and Game Freak, to their credit, deftly managed to avoid combining the move supposedly balanced by its awful accuracy with the ability that deleted missing as an option, though they did nearly collide, almost as close as our next Pokemon, Pursuit plus Dragon Dance Tyranitar. Now, alright, I know what you're thinking. This one isn't broken in the same way Shadow Tag Chandelure and No Guard Machamp are, but it would be a great combination because it allows Tyranitar to do the one thing that it would really like to do, but can't. Provide the metagame defining utility of its trapping, and threaten to sweep on the same set. Tyranitar's utility sets are endlessly customizable thanks to how much work Sandstream and Pursuit alone put in, as well as Crunch to potentially force the issue against Pokemon staying in to try and guard against Pursuit. But it means its other slots are ripe for experimentation, and its superb move pool means it has no shortage of ways that it can support its team, attack the opponent, and even punish opponents for thinking they can take advantage of its shortcomings. It's why you see Stealth Rock even on Scarf Tyranitar in Gen 4. It's why specially defensive Tyranitar in Gen 5 has used everything from Ice Beam to Thunder Wave to Dragon Tail. It's why you see all manner of things that might seem crazy on paper, like Tyranitars that don't have a move to hit Heatran, but work tremendously well in practice because Tyranitar can do anything. Tyranitar's utility is so vast, it even works on rain teams in Gens 3 and 4. It's insane. So though at first glance, it might seem like these moves don't go together strategically, if anything could pull it off, it would be Tyranitar. And by pull it off, we don't mean that it would technically be something it could do, but rather this would be another strategy Tyranitar would excel at. Funnily enough, we don't just have to theorize, as this sort of strategy does already exist on another Pokemon. In Gens 4 and 5, Scizor often runs a set with both Pursuit and Swords Dance. How does that work, you might wonder? Isn't it a bit idealistic to trap something with Pursuit early in the game and then boost up with Swords Dance and Sweep later on? Isn't that making a Pokemon do too much? Can it really stay healthy enough while performing utility Pursuit duties to be able to sweep later? The answer is yes, it is idealistic, overtly so. Yes, that would be asking too much of a Pokemon. No, you could not stay healthy enough while pursuing a Laddie Twin early on to be able to sweep later. However, this is predicated on the idea that Scizor is attempting to both Pursuit trap something and sweep in the same game. The beauty of the Swords Dance Pursuit set is that it allows Scizor to adapt its game plan depending on the matchup. It primarily acts as a pursuiter since its team is built with that Pursuit support in mind, but in some matchups, you just won't run into targets you rely on Scizor to pursue. Pursuit, and if that's the case, you can unleash Scissor's wicked Swords Dance boosted bullet punches late game. Plus, in some matchups, Swords Dance can even assist Scissor's ability to pull off a Pursuit trap against a bulkier opponent stubbornly unwilling to go down. For instance, defensive Latias in Gen 4 or Jellicent in Gen 5. Normally, they would have good chances at escaping with very little damage done or beating Scizor outright, but when his Swords Dance is up with a Lunberry for Jellicent's burns, then suddenly it's really cornered them. So if Scizor can do this, Tyranitar, with its Titanic tanking ability, higher attack, and a stab Pursuit, absolutely could, at least post-Gen 3, when Pursuit became a physical attack and thus could actually synergize with Dragon Dance. Probably not in Gen 5, where Dragon Dance Tar is useless, but in Gen 4, absolutely, and in Gen 6 and 7, when it Mega Evolves, without question. It would first and foremost be a Pursuiter, and that is Tyranitar's primary utility. But there are some matchups where it's just not needed for the task, and it can sometimes feel like dead weight with its low speed and not much way to really convert its power into that much progress. But suddenly, you pull out Dragon Dance, and you've got a would-be dead slot turned into a wicked counterattack that will, at the very least, leave more damage in its wake than it would have otherwise, if not the outright carnage that Dragon Dance Tyranitar is known for stewing through opposing cores. Especially because even if the two moves were compatible, nobody's looking at a Pursuit Tar and expecting a Dragon Dance. Even if Pursuit hasn't been revealed, its status as a Pursuit Tyranitar is in nearly all cases quite obvious to the opponent who notices the reliance on its trapping in the Tyranitar's team's synergies. It's still an offbeat option, but an excellent one. Plus, Dragon Dance gives Tyranitar that superb method for forcing the issue against bulky Pokemon who are trying to handle Pursuit by staying in. But again, Tyranitar actually threatened to go for a Dragon Dance sweep with only 2 moves for coverage, since one slot's going to the Pursuit that won't be used in this late game situation. Of course it can. The existence of Taunt Dragon Dance Tyranitar is testament to that, and in Gen 6 and 7, not only does Tyranitar become faster, stronger, and bulkier with its Mega, all qualities befitting more effective trapping and Dragon Dance sweeping alike, but the all-important target of Steel no longer resisting Dark makes Crunch even better. Pursuit Dragon Dance would really prove that Tyranitar could do it all. Heck, we bet it could even make it work with Special Pursuit in Gen 3. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Megamon VGC, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Sorazen Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu for their major support of our videos.